Welcome to the Lantern Cinema Podcast, part of a film society for the initiated, people who love to discuss cult, revival, and classic films, and film history, and sometimes Wayne's World. I am your host, Chris Viagini, and joining me is Dustin and Hannah Harmson.
Hello.
Hello. Good morning for us here in Des Moines, Iowa, but it's been a while since we've done one of these, and we are excited to be back in the recording booth doing this today.
Mm-hmm.
So we apologize for the lapse in time.
The holidays are crazy.
Holidays are crazy. We had big intentions for... was it November we hoped to do two? It didn't happen.
I think it was like September we hoped to do.
Since then, we've kind of decided to rework it. We've kind of went back to the drawing board. So maybe someone wants to kind of talk about that, like what the plan is with that.
Yeah, so the screenings from day one of Lantern Cinema, there's been monthly screenings at the Vaudeville Muse here in Des Moines, minus taking a month off here or there and kind of breaking it into seasons.
Mm-hmm.
And we're about to head into one of those now. So we have Decline of Western Civilization, Part 2.
Penelope Spheris, we love this movie. We're so excited.
Yeah, wrapping up our series of sequels.
That's coming out right at the very end of the month on January 31st. And then we have February off. And instead of launching in March with monthly screenings, we're going to do every other month.
Yes.
And try to make them bigger and better and a little more fine-tuned.
Yes.
Like the podcast we had been trying to do every month proved we couldn't do that once December hit. So we're also going to make the podcast every other month so that there's something from the Lantern happening every 3 or 4 weeks. And we're going to start that kind of now. So This is coming out here in January. We're going to do another podcast in February, and then not until April, not until June. Keep it going that way.
Essentially, anyways, the idea with the Lantern, this might be a good thing for Hannah to talk a little bit about, but we're more or less just trying to create a community that exists within Des Moines. You want to talk it?
Yeah, no, you got it. I think just the whole mission of the Lantern is to increase screenings and access to conversations about film and maybe people's awareness of different types of movies and just... like you said, Dustin, just kind of build that community and give people more opportunities to get excited about movies, which we absolutely are. So
yeah, I think it's happening right now too. It's exciting.
If we can pair that with some more regular, even just being able to say the podcast comes out on the third Thursday of every other month or something, that would be really nice. And
we'll lock it down and then spread that information whenever we actually have it.
Yeah, we'll get that's on the to-do list too.
Well, and like for today, we're doing Chinatown. The previous time we did the entire filmography of Kenneth Anger. Chinatown's such a landmark film in American film history. We kind of figured out like it definitely required more time than one would think to do it properly. So we, the research and all that takes a lot of time. So we want to make sure that we're doing a good job. So,
and you watched it 3 times.
4
times now?
I did 4 times. So, and the 4th time was the best time that I saw it.
Yeah, every time I've seen Chinatown, I've liked it and gotten it more.
Yes. Before we dive into Chinatown, I did want to say one thing real quick, though, going back to Decline of Western Civilization Part 2, which is, what's the date on that? The 27th, right?
31st.
Nope. January 31st.
Thank you. 31st of January at Vaudeville Muse in Des Moines, Iowa. We need you to show up 30 minutes beforehand because we will be doing our first ever, hopefully if everything works out, live podcast of Decline Part 2.
Yep, talking about Penelope Spheris. Maybe talking a little bit about Wayne's World.
Yeah. And her Hollywood films. We're super excited for it. So please come out and check that out. So is there anything else that we should be talking about?
I think that's it for intro. I think we should just kind of dig into Chinatown because there's a lot to talk about and...
let's do it.
An hour-ish to do it.
Yes. What we want to do right now, we're going to start doing a new segment slightly where we're actually going to watch the trailer and we'll have segments of it or the whole thing. That will be decided later on the top of the podcast to kind of get everybody in the world of the movie right away. And sometimes trailers are so much different than the actual movie and what people choose to advertise their movie as is really interesting, I think, sometimes. So,
we're going to strap in and watch this 3-minute and change trailer.
Yep, here we go.
Los Angeles, 1937. There are lots of guys like J.J. Gittes. They're easy to find, if you want to find them.
Mr. Gittes, have we ever met?
Well, no.
Never?
Never.
Since you agree with me that we've never met before, you must also agree with me that I've never hired you to do anything, certainly not spy on my husband. I don't get tough with anyone, Mr. Gittes. My lawyer does.
You do your job. And sometimes you find the answers to questions that should never be asked. Or you find out what happens to people who ask them.
Hold it there, kitty cat. You're a very nosy fellow, kitty cat, huh? You know what happens to nosy fellows?
I dislike the word cheat.
Did you have affairs?
Mr. Gittes,
Did he know about it? Where were you when your husband died? You were seeing someone too. For very long?
I don't see anyone for very long, Mr. Gittes. It's difficult for me.
Mr. Gittes, you're dealing with a disturbed woman who's just lost her husband. I don't want her taken advantage of.
The truth. I said I want the truth!
Go home, Jake.
I'm doing you a favor. Come on, Jake. Forget it, Jake. It's Chinatown.
You get tough. You get tender. You get close to each other. Maybe you even get close to the truth. Jack Nicholson and Faye Dunaway in a Robert Evans production of a Roman Polanski film, Chinatown.
Wow, loved it. What did you guys think of that?
I do think it's funny that a complaint about a lot of modern trailers is you're showing too much, you're showing the entire thing, now I don't even need to see the movie. Mm-hmm. This is a 3-minute trailer where they show the ending.
However, I was impressed watching it thinking, even though they do show the ending, which we will absolutely spoil here in a moment, you don't actually see, you don't know in what context it is. It's just someone shooting off into the distance. So I would say genre-wise watching it, if I was in the movie theater, I think I would think it was like a sexy gangster movie of years past, looking at it. Would you agree? It's interesting to see how they promote things.
And having a moment where suddenly they're like, oh, we need to have action. Let's show this car wheel getting shot, then he's beating this dude up, then there's just stuff happening for a chunk. It's like, oh, we haven't showed enough. They were just kissing, now here's just violence.
Did you like it, Hannah?
I was fine with it, yeah. I mean, from time to time, I do think there's an art, I know there's an art to making trailers, and sometimes the mismatch between the tone of the trailer and the movie is so off. I feel like this one at least matched.
Yeah, I thought it was perfect. Yeah. I'd be curious to know if Roman Polanski actually cut it. I doubt it. Usually they don't, but sometimes they do. So I think we should just jump right in here. This movie has been written about so much over the years. It seems like it's on many directors' best film of all time and a lot of people and critics. So I'm really excited to kind of jump in.
But that said, I feel like this is one that so many people, myself included, don't see. I mean, even though I've been into movies for years, I didn't see this until a couple of years ago. You know, and still I know a lot of people who just haven't seen Chinatown, even though when you Google it, it's very commonly called the best movie, the greatest film ever.
Yeah.
And so I think that has to kind of be the crux of what we talk about is why is this the best film? Why do people consider it that? And what factors might detract from that?
And once again, it kind of goes back to, Hannah touched on something. We all have different experiences of how we have experienced that movie. I know me and Hannah went to a screening of it not even that long ago at Fleur when we were first introduced to it. And I think we both walked away being like, I can tell this is a good movie.
I just saw something.
Yeah, conventional wisdom tells me that this is a good movie, but I feel like I need more information to understand. I thought the ending was masterful. At the time, I was very much impressed by the ending of the film. However, as has been discussed with previous movies, I'm not a great plot person, which this movie to me is very much in the tradition of kind of these, nuts and bolts kind of American films, how they deal with synopsis and dialogue, which I can appreciate now, but I still struggle with the nature of what actually happens through it. So I very much look forward to hearing what you guys have with that.
Well, and what's funny to me is I had proposed this as possibly doing a movie that we cover, not even knowing it was directed by Roman Polanski, not even knowing who that was.
Interesting.
My, Achilles heel of movies is not really knowing directors.
Mm-hmm.
So I've, as a hipster indie kid, gotten way into Wes Anderson. And I still know various touchstones, but I couldn't name another Roman Polanski movie at the time. So I didn't even know his backstory and everything that happens. But I proposed this because in the screenplay writing class that I took in college, we watched it from start to finish, and it was because this was supposed to be one of the greatest screenplays of all time. And Dustin found and then shared this fantastic article by Richard Luck of the Sabotage Times, Chinatown at 40, the making of Polanski's L.A. Noir. And he writes about, at the start, how this is supposed to be this great script and screenplay, and then immediately goes into, but nobody understood it.
Yeah.
Even the people making it, the people producing it are like, oh, this sounds good, but what is happening?
Yeah.
So it's funny that even when that was adapted and altered somewhat and became a film, that at least early on, it's not necessarily the easiest thing to follow until you piece it together later or rewatch it.
Well, we rewatched The Kid Stays in the Picture, the documentary about Robert Evans, kind of preparing for this, and the quote from him is something to the effect of, just like the title, the script might as well have been in Chinese because it was so incomprehensible even to him as the producer. And one of the reasons he wanted the film made was so he could actually understand what was going on.
Right.
Well, I guess we should pause, give an actual synopsis.
Yes. We have much
seen
to go on production.
The trailer. We've started talking a little bit about how this was made and what it is. My take on the synopsis is that Chinatown is a movie taking place in 1937 in Los Angeles, where we are guided through the film in every single scene by a former cop turned private eye. And he's hired for what seems like a routine. Wife thinks husband is cheating. Husband totally is cheating. Wife now has proof. The end. Only we find out that she is not who she said she was. She was posing as this woman, and then we are thrown into this increasingly complex and convoluted kind of macro mystery about water being misdirected, lies, crazy financial and political things, and the rich getting richer as the poor get thirsty. And then there's this macro story that it becomes about this family and this woman and this terrible, terrible human being, her father, being a murderous, incestual villain.
Yeah, so that's the simple version.
Yeah, well, hey, nice work though. I mean, nice work. That was a phenomenal job of. It is certainly a movie where you start off as Hannah, as we have discussed it many times at home watching it. It's like one red herring leads to another red herring. You start off thinking,
sometimes with literal fish imagery.
Yeah, I can't wait to talk about that. But it's like with each passing moment, it's like all of a sudden the story has changed. What you thought it was about is no longer about that. Things that you thought it were 3 times previous no longer matter.
Which I think watching it, the reason the movie gets better every time I watch it is because I, first time through, felt cheated. Because when I watch a movie, I'm looking for all these details that fall together perfectly at the end. I love looking back and saying like, oh, that's what that picture meant, or that's what that comment meant. And in this one, the first time through, you see all these, like what Dustin called red herrings, you see all these misleading plot points. And
MacGuffins, right?
Basically, yeah. And you feel cheated because they don't all lead to this grand conclusion. Every single time you find something, it ends up being unraveled. But as I watch the movie more and more, I realize how masterful all those choices are and how they actually do mean something, just not what you want them to mean or what you expect them to mean.
Yeah. It's a brilliant movie. And I think the story of how the movie kind of came to pass, I mean, do you agree? It kind of seems like as you research Chinatown, so much of the story is not only what you see on the screen, but also what led to the development of the film and what you finally see in its final presentation. Mm-hmm. And from my understanding, it seems to come down to essentially 3 different people that kind of made the whole thing happen. That would be screenwriter
Robert Towne,
producer, but head of Paramount Pictures at the time. Mm-hmm. My understanding was this was his first role as producer, like when he was truly the producer.
Right. It was Robert Evans' like first, I think, kind of like mini production house thing too. He got to just like pick what do you want to do? Like help make a movie because you're proven and you're good at this.
And this was on the heels of just some tremendous successes. First off, with Polanski's, breakout hit that took place, which was Rosemary's Baby, which was such a huge gamble of a film choice to even attempt to make that a commercially viable piece, which it was, and he had a lot of success with that. He did Love Story, and then also The Godfather. Mm-hmm. But then through those successes, he got the keys to the car.
Yeah, and then he held the keys very briefly.
Yeah,
because the film was such a success, despite everybody's reservations. People trying to talk him out of producing it. The film was such a success; it did really well at the Academy Awards. Obviously, it was successful commercially. That it ended up being the film that pushed him out of his position at Paramount. So essentially he could no longer kind of double dip because he was such a success, and that's what made him strike out as a producer on his own.
Yes. And then, so lastly, we talked about Robert Evans. Then
who's that third person? We have the Bobs.
Yes, the Bobs. And then we have Roman Polanski, who, as we will describe later, took a little bit of working to get him to actually come and direct this picture. I think for a lot of people that was involved in the production of it, the choice of Roman Polanski was so curious. It seemed like such a weird choice because a lot of Polanski's work leading up to this had been on the horror side of cinema and also kind of the supernatural. So what does Rosemary's Baby director have to do with this neo-noir gumshoe thing?
I don't want to say un-American, but like non-American, such a European director doing such an American film.
Yes.
Based on an American-focused genre.
And Robert Evans was just like adamant that it absolutely had to be Roman Polanski, mainly because of exactly what you're talking about. He wanted that European aesthetic to this. He wanted, some of the different conventions of European directors and what they're known for. I do have a hilarious quote with Robert Evans talking about this. Mainly, I don't have to quote the whole thing, but essentially the movie that led up to this, as he said, I wanted Roman to shoot the picture, so I watched his latest movie, a camp sex comedy. It may be the worst piece of shit I'd ever seen. Which is hilarious, but he was adamant that he thought Roman was the one to do it. So.
Well, it's also interesting to me that like some writers might have like an actor in mind as they're creating a character and writing a part. Not everybody does, but he knew who he was writing for and who he wanted to be and who he wanted to direct this if it became a film. Like he just kind of had everybody in mind, and then somehow that all happened.
Mm-hmm. Well, somehow nothing. The guy's just Robert Evans is just like a bulldog. I mean, Dustin just told me before we started talking that Robert Evans actually hosted a Seder to like pull in Roman Polanski and
to get him to read the script.
Yeah, to get him to read the script, he had to throw a Seder. I don't know if you throw a Seder, you host a Seder, but so we had a Seder and Warren Beatty was there.
Yeah, he wore a yarmulke and allegedly, I think it was Kirk Douglas actually read in Hebrew.
Yes, perfect Hebrew. So he really tried to court Roman Polanski to the picture. I know that Robert Towne wrote the script with Jack Nicholson in mind, who obviously is, you know, great actor and then like writer from Hollywood before all this.
And my understanding was, did Robert Towne actually write the script for The Great Gatsby? That's what got it to Robert Evans.
Well, Evans originally wanted to make The Great Gatsby,
which he thought was terrible.
He wanted Ali Negron, and then they broke up. There was some weird stuff with that.
It was Truman Capote's script for The Great
Gatsby. Oh, that's what it was. Thank you. Yes,
and he didn't like it, so he went into this.
And he went into Robert Towne, and Robert Towne allegedly just kind of said, "Listen, I am working on this other script."
That's right. Yeah.
And what he had to say about it was, we should get the direct quote for what he says Chinatown actually is. Essentially what it was, Robert Towne was working, he had a friend that was involved in police work, and he worked down in Chinatown. And more or less kind of what he said was, you don't know who's a crook and who isn't a crook.
Who's a crook?
So in Chinatown, they say, just don't do a goddamn thing. And that gave him the whole idea. It's this whole idea of corrupt police officers or people that are in positions of authority and not the inability to be able to believe anyone's story. So he kind of thought of Chinatown more as Chinatown as a state of mind, which I think that's just a beautiful way of going into a film.
And if you really take that to heart before you start watching, the film is a lot more enjoyable, and you stop trying to make sense of it in a conventional way, which, like I said, was my problem the first couple times seeing it. Was I tried to make conventional sense that just didn't exist. It's Chinatown.
Yeah, it's amazing. And I'm going to kind of go into a different, slightly kind of my takeaway from it, dealing with some of the more autobiographical aspects of Roman Polanski, all aspects of his life, and what I kind of think Chinatown means in regards to that. So we should talk about some of the main characters that are in it and some of their roles in that.
Yeah, I mean, it's J.J. Gittes.
However, they said it two different ways.
Giddies.
Okay, so, I mean, the big bad guy, I'm blanking on his name right now.
Noah Cross.
Noah Cross.
Played by John Huston, which is fabulous.
He intentionally never pronounces his last name correctly, even after being corrected, then he just says it a little bit differently, but still not right. I think that has now rubbed off on my brain of like, how do you say this name?
Yes.
Which is a great way just to be a total bitch. Just
yeah. Like, do it once on accident or on purpose, get corrected, and then you're just doing this to just slightly be getting under somebody's skin.
Yes.
Showing them how little you give a shit about them because you won't even pronounce their name correctly on purpose. So.
Like my dad used to do this thing where he, like when he talked to you, he'd look right at your forehead.
Just to fuck with you.
I
actually thought of that the other day. I was talking to someone and I thought I should do that, but I didn't. So, sorry, Andy. But yeah, did you notice in the trailer that happened? He said the name, there were several different, they pronounced it. So as you're listening to that trailer, you can feel free to go back and listen and see that. But I think once again, it's another beautiful, artistic way that they conveyed that idea of, even as the viewer, at no point do you understand what exactly you're looking at. There's always a sense of unease throughout that whole entire film.
Well, and I think some of the uneasiness is from the lead character, who I sometimes wish we knew a little bit more about his backstory. Basically, we know that he had been a cop. He had been working a lot in Chinatown. Bad things happened there. And that's presumably why he switched into this totally different lifestyle where you can use the same skills but get paid by wealthy people to not do a lot and get like these brand new Venetian blinds put into his office a few weeks prior and like wear nicer suits and have a good car and like have this stuff.
But still be kind of a sleazy PI.
Yeah, so like he has like a lot of this like sleaze to him, but seems to care sometimes. And there's a barbershop scene.
Love that scene.
Where he's getting shaved, and there's a banker, I believe, next to him calling him out because some of this work and the case has been in the papers. And he gets really defensive. And when I'm watching him, like, get up and yell at this guy, like, oh, at least I'm not, like, putting people out of their house and stuff like you do. Like, I do a good thing. Mm-hmm. It seems to have a split between actually thinking and believing that he does good work and wanting to convince himself that he does good work at the same time. It's like, oh, like, your current case, yeah, you're doing something interesting, but also you do a lot of sleazy shit. Yeah. Like, you just want to feel better because you've decided to stop being a cop and go into this world instead. And want to defend it.
And me and Hannah had a lot of conversations about, do we actually think the character of Jake is a good... What is it about him, and we haven't said yet, Jack Nicholson's incredible... Is it... I mean, what is it? Like, this versus The Shining as to what is all-time greatest...
It's well acted. He did a lot of heavy lifting because he appeared in literally every scene of the movie. And so
well, and also... sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, is he a good guy? Roger Ebert, writing about this, was talking about how he's kind of surprisingly the soft-spoken man. He wants to be nice, he wants to be polite, but there's, like we're talking about, that pull of his line of work and the world he's pushed into.
Yeah. Well, and ultimately we're kind of talking about this idea of corrupt police officers and authority, and we'll get into the ending later, but it appears to me that all throughout the film, he definitely believes in the idea of police officers, and he believes in the idea of this chain of command, and he thinks, relatively speaking, all things are good, and until it gets to that ending where you can kind of see it on his face. It's like an entirely different world that he now knows exists. Jack Nicholson's incredible in this film. We've talked a lot about it. One of the things I found interesting was, so Roman Polanski did help Robert Towne kind of rewrite, because the original script was obvious. I've definitely read that it was out of control originally. It was too long. And Roman Polanski did sit down and actually do a lot of, let's cut this, let's cut that. Roman Polanski...
They fought about it a lot.
They fought about it a lot. Sounds like it wasn't the most, great relationship.
The production across the board was really contentious.
Yeah. But one thing that was agreed upon was Roman Polanski really felt that Jack Nicholson should say all of the lines of dialogue in his own voice. So there would be points where it was like really jumbled, or he would just go to Jack and say, well, how would you say this? And give him that ability to do that. And he's awesome in that movie. That barbershop scene, I was just talking about how much I love that. Even the sex joke that he does. You know what I mean?
When Faye Dunaway comes up behind him and he's telling this really off-color racist sexist.
Oh my God. And it's interesting. It's just like his own natural charisma just shines in that movie. There's moments where jokes happen where it's like, that's weird that we even got to laugh at it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
We were talking about Easy Rider, which was the Lantern's first screening that we did. And I said to Hannah, well, Jack Nicholson's role in that, he absolutely saved that movie. You know, by the time he
comes into that movie, it's different. And when he leaves it, it's meaningful and then has a different vibe for the rest of that.
Yeah, and when he dies, everyone's like, oh my God, they killed him.
I care more about George in that movie than I do about Captain America. You know, it just...
Yeah. So not to get off topic, but it's interesting.
Nicholson.
I
think it's funny, like, those two characters are slightly similar in that I think his role in Easy Rider is someone who is a drunk and is a bit of a fuck up, but like wants to be kind of good and like helps them out. And he like wants to be cool and like learn how to like have fun. So he just goes on this journey. And then him here as JJ, I don't think he is a particularly good person, but he wants to be. But there are like aspects of his maybe like damaged past or just his personality that keeps that from happening. And it's mostly his inability to not trust anybody else at any given point for more than 5 seconds, where he and Evelyn, who we will get to, constantly not on the same page, really. He's always thinking she's hiding things from him, and she is, but it's not at all what he expects. Somehow they end up falling for each other a bit, and then immediately after they have slept together and like actually had like a somewhat nice moment, she has to leave and is like, just please stay here. Just please trust me, stay here. And he doesn't. And if he did, he never would have seen her again, but things would have been better for everybody. But he follows her, ends up immediately calling her out. They showed in the trailer, he slaps her around and throws her. Not a great person.
No.
And immediately calls the police thinking he has figured everything out. And then that also backfires because he just always thinks he is smarter than everyone, including the cops when he's like belittling them throughout the movie. He's like, oh, I like that you guys are doing this, but also I'm smarter than you and better than you at this. Clearly you're going to fuck it up. I'm going to figure it all out. Like, he doesn't trust anyone, and that leads to bad behavior.
His major flaw is hubris. You're right. He thinks he knows everything. You think as the viewer that he's going to suss everything out because he's this, detective, and he seems pretty bright, and he seems to know what he's doing, like putting clocks under car wheels, and,
Pretty smart.
Yeah, pretty smart. He has
to
tricks.
do that to Hannah, by the way. Just to make sure she's still more specific she's supposed to.
And I think that's the cool thing about this movie is that it's not uncommon that, that trick that you as the viewer really associate with that protagonist and learn things as they do. And in this movie, they do a lot of cool things about, Jake seeing things through lenses or in reflections or through, veiled windows and things like that. But we really think we're figuring it out too. And so by the time we realize that we as the viewer and he as the private investigator don't know anything and we're in way over our heads, the movie's over and everything has gone to shit.
So terribly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really bizarre. And then, well, like I said previously, I said time number 4 was the best time. For me, it was the best time because all the things you guys are talking about is all stuff that I didn't quite understand. I definitely got caught up in the story, and anytime that happens for me, I just stop focusing on that, and I just enjoy the movie as a movie in general. But this last time, it was like, oh, I'm hip to everything that's actually happening to this. So specifically, Faye Dunaway's character, who I think she's just phenomenal in this. Do you guys agree?
Oh, yeah, and they hated her. I mean, I can't remember who it was, if it was Polanski or... Someone hated her for the role, didn't want her at all. But
I think Polanski, he wanted Jane Fonda.
Okay.
Which I can't imagine Jane Fonda.
I think she just acted it beautifully. I think she's awesome in this. And she did not do a lot. Like, she's kind of a reclusive figure, and really keeps her cards close as a person and didn't act in a lot of things. But I think this is just amazing. I think she's great in this.
When she starts off strong, like, just putting her best foot forward as a character and be like, so you agree we've never met? Like, I'm not this. Oh, hey, here's my lawyer. Like, I don't get tough with anybody. I let my lawyer do it. Like, you royally effed up, and I'm here just to, like, prove who I am and how much I can bring you down. Well, and then steps back to being more reclusive and secretive.
Absolutely. And like I said, once again, going back to time 4, this is when I realized the nuance of her performance in it. When you realize that her entire story is covering something up, this incredibly dark actual underpinning that exists in this film, you realize that just like, oh my God, she delivered all of these lines with such delicacy, and her facial expressions that she does really conveys this really undercurrent.
The moment she looks, after she has to identify her husband's body, those moments where she looks anxious, you think it's, based on one situation, but seeing through to the end, it's 100% based on another, and masterful choices.
And I think that's the fun of this movie. It's like once you're in on the entire thing, you can really start to unpeel the onion of this, just unbelievably artfully done. You guys were talking about the different production issues that existed, and yes, Roman Polanski absolutely did not want Faye Dunaway as the character. He knew that she was, she had a reputation for being a difficult actress. He really wanted Jane Fonda, but their relationship was actually so troubled throughout the whole film. At one point, she came out from the makeup department or something, and she had one hair, allegedly, that he thought was incorrect, how it should be. And he just went over and pulled the hair out of her head, like actually pulled it off of her face. Yeah. And she was done. She ran off the production. And once again, going back to Robert Evans, who is kind of the big babysitter of this whole production, had to kind of get everyone back in line and say, listen, I'll get everyone here, I don't know, something like Rolls Royces if we get this thing finished, which got everyone back.
Yeah, I think it goes back. I think there's a quote in that article about how, if you two don't both get nominated for an award, I will buy you a stupidly expensive car. But they both got nominated. So.
Yeah, and she wasn't the only person that Roman Polanski had issues with. He also had issues with Jack Nicholson. Jack Nicholson being a huge sports fan. I'm going to go ahead and read an exact story because I think this is very fascinating from someone that was involved in the production, which goes back to that article that Chris referenced before. So this person said, Roman says, this is in regards to he was supposed to be filming something. Jack Nicholson, where's Jack? I went back to Jack and he went, Howie, it's overtime. I'm not leaving now because he used to watch basketball games on the set. Just tell Roman I've been waiting an hour and a half. Let him wait a few more minutes. So Roman has a cow. And then the game goes into double overtime. We're all basketball fans, so nobody is upset except for Roman, who couldn't give a fuck about the Lakers. Where is he? Said Roman. Roman, it's double overtime. He's like, what the fuck is double overtime? He eventually goes into Jack Nicholson's room and I don't know, it's like
he tried to smash the TV, couldn't, so then he threw it out instead.
And Jack Nicholson eventually is just like, who in the fuck does this guy think that he is? So this whole film was really just a tremendous pissing contest, it seems like.
Yeah.
I just hate Roman Polanski.
Yeah.
I hate liking this movie because Roman Polanski, of all the douchebags in this movie, is the assholiest of them all.
Well, because it sounds like he also kind of borderline sexually harassed people during the making of the film.
Big surprise.
Because he was the director and thought he was the most important thing ever.
Well, and that's the thing too. It's the whole idea of some of Roman Polanski's sexual history. It's obviously very, there's a lot of issues that go in. And we'll go into that later, but what you guys are kind of saying, his history of infidelities and relationships with younger...
And rape, yeah.
Yeah, we'll get into all...
Yeah, we'll talk.
Yeah, well, no, it's all good. But it's something that's well documented, so it's no surprise that there were some issues that took place on set. So a couple more notable cast choices was, I found this fascinating because I knew the history of it, but having John Huston, director John Huston as... Say that, Noah Cross?
Noah Cross.
Who's the main antagonist,
right,
more or less, in the film.
And he fits the part so well, just from the moment you hear his voice.
Yeah. And what I heard was, to get kind of this eerie kind of vibe, they really didn't give him any acting directions. They just told him, just be yourself. And his own natural way of being was enough to add the perfect menacing quality that exists within this picture. One thing interesting on an autobiographical sense was, at that time, Jack Nicholson had just started dating Angelica Huston, which was his daughter. So those moments, there's a lot of interesting things that take place where John Huston or Noah Cross says to Jake, are you sleeping with my daughter? Which is really bizarre because, that was a real moment that took place. It was a fresh relationship. I can't even imagine. Let alone the fact that he's one of America's greatest directors that ever existed and had done films like this. And I think there's a lot of allusion to some of John Huston's work within this film that I think adds to this whole layer. Specifically, like the people riding horses. Yeah, that's a really bizarre kind of. All of a sudden, it's like Stagecoach or something like that. Where he's, it's just really bizarre. So,
and the scene with John Huston in it. I didn't think about that. Okay.
How do you mean? Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. Will someone please get into this incest thing and then also the ending? Let's do it.
Yeah, let's do it. I think it's one of the few things in this movie that doesn't trickle out information ahead of time. Where there is here, this is actually salt water, not fresh water. Mm-hmm. Here are glasses that you've seen before. They're not from the person that he thinks they are. There's different stuff trickled out kind of every 3 to 5 minutes about various plot points. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure there's anything that stands out as much about, she was raped by her father, had a daughter, that's who this other person is. That's why she's been secretive. Like, that's what this is about. Like, forget about the macro things. If you just boil it down to this is why everything is happening, is because of this fucking terrifying predator of her father having done this, and her just trying to now escape and get her daughter/sister out of this hellhole. I don't think that there's much... You can tell there's uneasiness between her and her dad at times, but I don't think there's anything that hints to this is the reason why there's uneasiness.
Right, she says he's dangerous. She's afraid of him. She doesn't have a relationship with him, but... Sorry. But yeah, I agree. I think it's this reveal where you can go back and see where a lot of her behavioral choices come from. And it really adds to that level of us being unaware as a viewer, thinking that the girl's the mistress in the beginning and mistaking Mulray. What's her husband's first name?
Hollis.
Oh, such a good name too. Great name.
Oh yeah, great.
Hollis Mulray, thinking he's kind of a sleazy guy, but realizing in retrospect that he's actually a very kind, protective person after his death. I think it lends itself to that, but I agree. It's not something you can really lead up to, and it's horrifying when that's revealed.
Well, especially how it's revealed.
Yeah.
Because she is revealing having been sexually assaulted while she is being physically assaulted. Because this is the scene when he's slapping her around and throws her at this couch, and she's like crying and going back and forth where she's my daughter, she's my sister, she's my daughter, she's my daughter and my sister. And it's like...
It's so hard to grasp.
Moment.
Yeah, oh my lord. Yeah. And then also, like, once Jake finally goes and confronts Noah Cross, and he says, listen, you killed Mulray, I understand that, and I understand X, X, and X. The artistry of all of a sudden seeing that character as a completely spooky... This is as bad as it gets. And then once it eventually gets to that ending.
Which I think the moment I really noticed when we watched the ending again just the other night, when she yells, like when she's about to take off in the car and she says, he owns the police. It's like you just have this scope of how huge and powerful and enormous this whole thing is.
I was going to say something too. This was a line of thinking. I have a knack for the conspiratorial when I watch things. So I'm always kind of looking for the subtext or maybe something that a director's possibly putting in here. One of the coolest things that I kept, me and Chris were talking about this a lot. I kept noticing that they kept showing fish in this movie. A lot of, it's like all of a sudden they'll just show a picture of a fish. All of a sudden they're eating a fish. The club that they go and talk to Cross in is the Albacore Club. So I kept expecting there to be like this underpinning of what that is. And I kind of have two different pieces of analysis what I think it could be. But what I did find out was the Albacore Club was based off of a real kind of exclusive club that existed in California in the early 20th century, which I still think it exists now on the Catalina Islands, called the Tuna Club, which was home of a lot of people that were involved in the Hollywood kind of upper echelon community and also political figures. That it was like the secret club that they were a part of. It wasn't secret in the way of some like secret societies, but it was, you had to get in. From there, I really tried to find something like, trying to find if they were known to have some kind of devious history or anything. Right. I really couldn't find any evidence to support that. So I think it's more or less just cool that they put in that little, once again, just showing the artistry of Robert Towne, just show that little piece of something that existed in California at that time.
Help ground it in reality.
And then a greater sense, how does Mulray die? That kind of gets this whole ball rolling. He's drowned. So I think there's a lot of stuff having to do with fish that exists kind of throughout this. Where do they end up finding the glasses in the fish tank? So there's a lot of cool. That's the stuff I love.
Yeah.
The ending.
The ending, it also was like the one really major thing that Polanski changed.
Yes.
Because the ending was, so in the end,
all
of the players come together. They're all in Chinatown.
And all of them, too. Everyone that you've seen in the film from the beginning.
Even Curly.
You drove Curly. God bless Curly.
Yeah. So, like, everybody is there. The cops, the good guys, the bad guys.
Evelyn, her daughter, sister, Catherine.
Oh, that just hit me.
Noah Cross is there.
Yeah. They're all there. They're trying to make their escape. Evelyn and her sister-daughter are trying to make their escape right as the cops are there to stop Jake and stop them. And they still don't understand the bigger picture of what's happening. Cross is there to stop them and get them back and get his younger daughter to just be with him and continue to be a creepy, horrible human. And she tries to drive off, tries to get away. Cops start shooting. Jake, I think, him or one of his partners stop one of them. Other one still fires off a couple shots. Kill her. Cross walks over, gets the person he wanted out of the car, slips away. Cops leave him, don't question him. Jake is just there, stunned as like everything has fallen apart in front of him, mostly because of his unintentional doing. Mm-hmm. And then it just ends remarkably depressing. I was like, oh, hey, this is the world. The bad guy won. Things are happening. Nobody else knows about this. Nobody else knows about the water stuff. Mm-hmm. We forgot about that by now.
Yeah, Noah Cross gets everything he wants.
Yeah.
He gets the girl he's been looking for this whole time who, you know, they kind of like surreptitiously hired Jake in a roundabout way to find her. Right. And he, you know, he's killed the opponent to his plan with the water, where he can just get even filthier rich. Or, you know, as he says earlier, he buys the future.
Yeah.
And it's just a very Polanski ending, and that the bad guy wins, and there's no if, and, or but about it.
And Evelyn was supposed to kill her father in the original version of the script.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Well, okay, so yeah, we might as well get into that. This is probably the most contentious part of the film that existed between the relationship between Polanski and Robert Towne. And Robert Towne was really pissed at Robert Evans for a long time that Robert Evans sided with Polanski. He really felt that he should have had alliance to him because they kind of started this together. Right. But this is a direct quote from Polanski himself in regards to the Faye Dunaway character dying at the end. He said, "She has to die at the end if the film's to have any kind of meaning."
And that blondes die in Los Angeles.
Yeah, that was something that Robert Towns had said. So this whole idea of him changing the ending himself adds to the biographical nature of the film, which for me as myself, as we had learned previous with Kenneth Anger, yeah. I'm someone that has a deep interest of researching and studying the Manson family phenomenon that took place in the 60s. And I think Roman Polanski being married to Sharon Tate, obviously the victim, one of the victims that died in that murder, the idea of autobiography in this has to be looked at, and the whole time autobiography has to be looked at. So my entire time watching the film, there was a lot of things to me that really stuck out, where I was just like, oh my Lord, this is, to me, I watched it and I'm just like, this feels like a purging of himself and what had taken place. A couple of those things leading up to that is the fact that this movie was filmed in 1974. In 1969, in August, when that murder had taken place, Roman Polanski actually wasn't at the house. All the other people were there that got murdered. So when that murder officially, happened and took place, Roman Polanski was probably the number one suspect in it itself, because they found it curious that he was off in England looking at locations for, further movies. So when Roman Polanski did finally come back, he was flown back to LA the next day, and, he was immediately taken to custody to go into questioning. They really didn't believe his story until he himself had passed a lie detector test. So at which point he goes on kind of a crusade to actually go take the case on his own hands and try to solve the case for investigators. He truly felt that it was going to take artists and creative people to actually be able to figure out who the actual murderers of this thing was. So he really did do some pretty unusual things to try to go out and figure out this murder. One of them being he had someone from Life magazine, like a week after the murders took place, actually go to the house that it took place, and he had this person from Life magazine come and take photos of everything. He thought for sure that he could find some clue. And one of the investigators actually came to him and said, "Here, I think you should know this." And he showed Roman Polanski a pair of horn-rimmed glasses. And he showed him this, and Roman Polanski was positive that this was going to be the thing that he could actually go and figure it out. In the film itself, that was something that really stuck out to me.
Yeah, it's those glasses, and they're like an early thing, too.
They're an early thing, and I wasn't as hip to that early on. But there's the scene where he actually goes and finds the young lady that's been murdered in the house, and he goes and he really does a tremendous close-up on these broken glasses. So that was my key, and I was just like, oh my God, this is mind-blowing. So I kind of walked away from the film having several questions about, how much did how much of his autobiography informed this film? What's the deal with the glasses?
Yeah.
What's the deal with him ending it? And what does possibly all of this have to do with his later controversies. So at this point, I would like to take some time to give a huge shout out and thanks to Nicholas Schreck, who is a filmmaker and also author of The Manson File, Myth and Reality of an Outlaw Shaman, which is right now, he's still in the process of finishing a final edition for it. So keep a lookout for that. He's also a filmmaker that did Charles Manson's Superstar. He has another amazing book called The Satanic Scream, an illustrated guide to the devil in cinema, which right now has a German pressing, but will be coming out in a U.S. edition shortly. And he's also a musician from the group Radio Werewolf, a pretty huge band from the 80s that had a lot to do with the Gothic kind of movement. So I did reach out to Nicholas Schreck, and he did provide me with a lot of interesting insight into some of my own personal analysis and things that stuck out to me initially. It's important to note that Nicholas Schreck does have a different interpretation of what took place other than the helter-skelter theory. At the film, once again, we're talking about the glasses. In regards to that, this is exactly what Nicholas Schreck said. After the robbery turned into murder, either Charlie himself or Patricia Krenwinkel, at his instructions, left a pair of glasses at the crime scene as a false clue to confuse the cops. This was done during a second visit to the Cielo Drive house. Although I'm reasonably certain that Polanski had a good idea of who was probably responsible for the murders, he examined the possibility that those glasses belonged to, among other suspects, his and Sebring's friend, Bruce Lee. As part of his own private investigation, he focused on the glasses in particular. The first time I saw Chinatown, I was certain that the close-up must be a cryptic reference to the glasses at Cielo. Yes, I think it was a deliberate choice. There are many other examples of sometimes very obscure and coded commentary to the crimes throughout his post-69 films. And once we're going to talk about later, Macbeth is a good example of that. And then also, I found in the film, one of the most interesting things is that Polanski himself is cast in the movie.
Yeah.
And, okay, so what he is like this kind of, I guess that they don't say he's Polish.
Let's just call him a thug.
Yeah, he's well in the at the end it says "man with a knife." That's what he's actually credited with, and he has like a pretty, I think the scariest movie in the film in terms of it's so disturbing.
He just shows up out of nowhere too. He's someone that we didn't know existed, never see or hear about again, and he's just there with a knife, being threatening and kind of joke at the same time. Kitty cat,
yeah. And he takes the knife. And he puts it up to Jack Nicholson's nose, which was a real knife. It kind of had a device in it to make it so it wouldn't 100% hurt him, but it was still pretty scary. And he cuts his nose. And once again, it's Polanski doing it. Those murders, when they took place, a lot of it happened with a knife, and I was curious about that. And Nicholas Schreck himself also kind of confirmed that he suspected that there was, something to do with that.
Well, I'd imagine psychologically, just obviously with a terrible situation like that, you might grasp for any kind of control you have. So to cast himself as this, violent person, or to go into personal investigation, those are all means of giving himself control over a really awful situation.
Yeah. So there's certainly an element to me when I watch this film where I almost think of the Jake character as a replacement for Roman Polanski himself. After this murder took place, he went on, this extreme, detective mission himself. He put up, him and several other actors put up money, $25,000 to find who took place. And once the murders were discovered, or who was responsible for it, Roman Polanski lost interest, and he kind of just went off with his life. And immediately after this took place, it was well known that he started sleeping with girls like a month after it took place. Many underage women, 16 to 19 years old. And I was curious what Nicholas Schreck thought about, how much of this how much of Polanski's history informed his later controversies. And he states basically in here that, Roman Polanski was someone of not maybe the greatest morals to begin with. So it's not much to inform it. So, which brings us to the later controversy, and why I think when Chris originally brought this movie, I should say something too. Okay. Nicholas Schreck also gave us this amazing clip with him actually interviewing Charles Manson, where Charles Manson brings up Chinatown.
From LA to Frisco,
right?
There used to be wildernesses and streams going by onto the road.
Right.
Now you go by this, they got all the streams cut off, and they got them in fall.
It's worse than you can even imagine. It's a nightmare. It's just all concrete. It's terrible.
Yeah. And they're just butchering everything.
Right. The California you knew doesn't even exist. I mean, I'm sure you can tell that, but it's gone.
And you mentioned to people that don't hear it. You remember that movie that Polanski made about about when he cut Jack Nicholson's nose?
Oh yeah, Chinatown, right?
Yeah. Well, all that water that they were just throwing out in the ocean?
Right.
That water was coming from the water holes in the desert.
I always, it's funny you mention that. I always thought, because I know you were really thinking about that a lot, about the water supply to LA. I thought it was weird. Polanski puts a lot of your ideas in his movies, and I always wonder why he does. I almost think he's playing some kind of mind game.
So, anyways, later on in life, there's this tremendous controversy that takes place, and I think originally you were a little unsure about if we should even do this film because of the, Polanski's
like I mentioned, I didn't know who he was. I had just heard his name as a director, and so I also didn't know that he was a terrible person. So then once I learned that, I was like, oh, should we even do this? But it was interesting how the end ties in to him and his controversy and all of this. Like, being a villain, like being a bad person, and then changing the ending to make the bad person, who also raped women, be the one that gets the good ending. Mm-hmm. And him, as a director, being like, I am the director, I can do whatever I want, and then presumably having some of that just in his day-to-day life, being like, I am this important thing, bow down to me.
And leading up to this in the research, we also watched Macbeth, which came out, in 1971 or something like that, which is very shortly after the murders. It's probably the most violent film I've ever seen.
I can't stop thinking about it. Like, that whole movie is just so disturbing, and
it's a masterful
story.
movie.
Yeah. So, which I think, I had the same thoughts. I mean, do we shine more light on awful people who make great art. And I think it's just a question that we keep coming back to, especially like culturally right now. It's a big question. There's no question that Roman Polanski is awful. And do I want to make him richer? No. But knowing he's a rapist, knowing he has a really terrible criminal history, knowing he's just kind of an awful person, that's been a huge internal struggle for me that I'm still working through, frankly, because, you know, I like this movie. You know, I love the art he's created. And, you know, I'm also someone who got into film by watching a bunch of Woody Allen movies before I really knew about his personal story. And so I think we have this question of what do we do with art once it exists, even if the person it's connected to is horrendous.
Well, and I think Polanski himself is even further complicated because even within the Hollywood community, he has a lot of people that are really champions of him.
Yeah, and still want to make movies with him. They still... And
I think a big reason for that is that he's a Holocaust survivor. That's something that's tricky. He was, he was a Polish... You know, he was in Poland during the time of the occupation. His mother died at a concentration camp, and he was in foster care for a good portion of his life. So it's really tricky. I actually read something that the Faye Dunaway character in the movie, he really made pains to make her look like his own mother. So I think it's really complex. The controversy itself took place after Chinatown. Chinatown is arguably the peak of his career in terms of film. Everyone, you know, loves Chinatown. Essentially what it was, he took... Gosh, how old was she? Was she 14 years old? 13?
Yeah, I don't think we necessarily go into details, but he drugged and raped a 13-year-old.
He admitted to it. He
admitted to it. There's no question to it. It doesn't sound like it was out of character for his behavior, and has never formally been punished.
He went on under a certain amount of time for a psych evaluation, in which they said, you know, the prison itself said that, you know, he's not a threat to society. This is something that happened, more or less. And after that, the judge himself was like, no, we need to have a more proper thing.
So he fled the country and essentially just hasn't come back.
Yeah. So I think that's Chinatown, right? You think, is there anything else really to be said about it?
We have to talk about why it's such a good script.
Because
Chris came at it was the screenwriting class, is that what you said?
Yeah, it was a screenwriting class, and this was the one film, I'm 99% sure this was the one film that we actually watched from start to finish in class. Where usually it was like, here's what this is like, here's what this character development is like, here's what exposition is when it's bad or good. And our teacher was like, just watch this movie. And it is the end that had stuck with me, and I think it's funny that it's the end that was the biggest thing that changed, because all of us were just shocked by just the gut punch that the last 5 minutes is.
Oh, man.
And just feeling shitty for what we just watched. But, like, it has, I mentioned earlier, there is just, like, constant information. And it's always giving you hints at things from the very beginning. Everybody is kind of explained in their own time. There's clues throughout. You'll get one answer to something and then 2 or 3 more questions about what that